Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a crime thriller film, Confession of Murder. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins in the early winter of 2005. One rainy night, groups of people are enjoying themselves, drinking, eating, and talking in a small pub. All of a sudden, two men crash through the glass entrance. Everyone runs away from them as the two men brawl. One of them happens to be the detective searching for a serial killer who has more than 10 victims. This killer is whom the detective is currently in a fight with. At one moment, the killer goes to the bar owner and holds her at knife point. He then slices the woman's throat and pushes her to the detective before he flees. The detective continues to chase after him in the cold pouring rain, scuffling in the process. They reach the top of an abandoned building. The detective manages to shoot the killer before he escapes. He then follows the trail of blood from the killer that leads to a dark alley. As he carefully creeps into the darkness, he is grabbed by the killer and is stabbed several times on the stomach. The killer slits his mouth for good measure. As he walks away, the detective fires a few rounds and manages to shoot him on the shoulder. A year passed, the detective becomes an alcoholic as he is haunted by his failure to solve the 15-year-old case. He goes back to the same dark alley when he receives a disturbing phone call. A family member of one of the victims, a boxer whom he treats like a sibling, calls him to say his goodbyes. The detective runs to his home and tries to stop him. Unfortunately, the boxer no longer wants to live and throws himself off a roof, landing through the windshield of a passing bus. In the late autumn of 2007, the whole nation is in for a big surprise by the news of a book that will be released to the public. The author of this book seems to claim responsibility for the unsolved murder cases that happened 17 years ago. But he is confident to show himself up before the public since the statute of limitations expired just 2 years ago. A press conference is held by a publishing company president. She introduces the author to the whole world. The author explains that the book contains detailed descriptions of the 10 murders that happened in the past. He displays a wound in his shoulder where he says the detective shot him with the bullet still lodged inside. The detective, however, is not at all convinced by the author's declaration. He believes that he is an imposter. The author's book is now a bestseller because of his charming looks. Apparently, because of this, he has gained fans and supporters. He stages public visits to the homes of family members to repent for his crimes. However, he is not forgiven despite his attempts. Not long after, he visits the detective at his precinct. This action causes outrage to the detective. As the media frenzy surrounding the author increases, some family members of the victims gather together, attempting to plot their revenge. Their leader is the mother to her daughter, who is the 11th victim, but is still missing. She is accompanied by a snake enthusiast, a brother of another victim, a former inmate, and a hunter. The next day, the author goes for his daily swim in a private hotel pool. The snake enthusiast dresses as a janitor and releases a den of snakes into the pool. The author gets bitten by one of them and is surrounded by several more. He is then rushed to the entrance, where the former inmate and the hunter pose as a paramedic unit, pretending to take the author to the hospital. Unfortunately, as they load the author in the back of the ambulance, the real paramedics arrive. The former inmate distracts them, as the snake enthusiast drives off with the hunter and the author at the back. The former inmate is able to catch up with the ambulance, and they drive away as the author's men chase after them. As this is going on, the detective receives a call that the author is being kidnapped. So the detective drives to the kidnapper's current location and recognizes the snake enthusiast as one of the victim's family members. He is able to catch up with them, but later finds the unconscious author is awake and jumps out of the moving vehicle to escape. They are also tailed by the brother of a former victim. After a fast and furious car chase, the brother of a former victim pushes the former inmate and the author back into the ambulance, knocking out the author in the process, and the kidnappers get away. That night, they watch the news on TV about how the media suspects the abductors to be the family members of the murder victims. Meanwhile, the detective goes out of his way to track down where the author is being held. With the help of trackers, his colleague traces their phone's location and manages to find the exact whereabouts of one of the kidnappers. The detective follows them into a cabin in the woods. The leading woman tries to interrogate the author after waking him up. Then the detective switches the lights off. The whole cabin is pitch black as the kidnappers try to figure out what is happening. The former inmate accidentally falls on the author and knocks him out again. The detective, using night vision goggles, is able to retrieve the author away from his abductors. He carries the author all the way to his car as the hunter and the snake enthusiast release the dogs that chase after them. Much to the kidnapper's dismay, the detective escapes the place and succeeds in his rescue mission. Not long after, he leaves the still unconscious author inside a motel room and a note telling him not to make a fuss about his kidnapping if he values his life. The next day, the detective and his colleagues watch the live broadcast of the author, who's explaining to the public that his kidnappers are only just his overzealous fans. He also mentions that he will not be pressing charges. Not long after, the leading woman goes to the precinct and confronts the detective. Her suspicions of him being the rescuer are right when she sees that the detective has a wound that she inflicted on him the night before, so she slaps him and walks out. Soon after, a television station invites the detective and the author on a debate show to discuss the recent matter at hand. Right then, they receive a phone call from a stranger. The stranger reveals to them that he knows many personal facts about the detective. Afterwards, the man tells the whole nation that he is in fact the real serial killer. After revealing the surprising news, the country is now in a state of turmoil. The detective leaves the station after they try figuring out the location of the killer, who happens to be at the home of the detective. Meanwhile, the hunter, who earlier leaves the cabin to get some fresh air, decides to end the author's life. She prepares to shoot the author from the opposite side of where he is being interviewed. She succeeds at aiming and hitting the author, but eventually fails to escape, so the police surround her and lock her up. Subsequently, the detective and his colleague rush to his home and find the door unlocked. He sees a note written about his mother being killed. The detective starts freaking out. His mother suddenly comes out of the room, awakened by her son's racket. He is relieved and hugs his mother as tight as he can. He then sees the silhouette of a man right across the building. It's the killer, who seems to give him a signal. The detective soon runs to the other building and finds a knife and a video cassette tape. In the cassette tape is a short clip of his mother being tucked in bed by the killer, then followed by a clip of the 11th victim, who has been missing for years. The detective decides to call another press conference to put on a show of his own. The next day during the press conference, the detective tells them that the knife he found the night before matches his DNA. It's the knife that the killer used to slit the detective's mouth 2 years ago. This news baffles the press, and people start questioning who the real murderer it is. But the author responds to the rumors that the knife originally kept in his safety deposit box has been stolen by the killer. The author still tries to manipulate the media by telling them that he doesn't want to press charges on the hunter for hurting him. He wants to donate all of his earnings to the families of the victims that he allegedly murdered in the past. Not long after, they receive a live feed from the real killer. To end this entire charade once and for all, the killer requests for a live broadcast of him, the author, and the detective. As the news media prepare for the big day of the public debate, the family members of the victims conjure up another plan. The leading woman asks the snake enthusiast to place snake venom in the ink cartridge of a pen, while the rest of them prepare for revenge as well. At the night of the public debate, the author's fans are outside the station to support the confessional murderer. Meanwhile, the killer arrives a little later. On a live broadcast, the news media shows the place where the 11 victims' remains are buried. Since the location is given by the killer, this gives further proof that he is really the murderer. Seeing that, the detective tries to attack the killer, but is stopped by his bodyguards. In the toilet during a break, the detective gets a flashback. It seems that the 11th victim is actually his lover. But her mother, the leading woman, does not approve of their relationship because she believes that it will only bring danger to her daughter. Not long after, they go back live, and the author finally admits that he is not the serial killer. He tells the public that the real writer of the book is none other than the detective. It's revealed that the author is also a family member of the serial killer's first victim, and he is actually the boxer after plastic surgery who attempted to commit suicide in the past. The TV host is given information about the author's real identity. He tells the public that there are no traces of similarities with what the author looks like now, comparing it to the photo of the boxer. The doctor, another family member of one of the victims, admits that he performed reconstructive surgery in order to change the face of the boxer, who the world now knows as the author. The detective and the author also reveal that this has been their master plan to weed out the real killer since the very beginning. The detective describes the killer as someone who is obsessed with his own power and wants nothing more than to be the center of attention and thus taking the bait. Despite being surprised at the elaborate scheme, the killer still claims that the detective cannot do anything to him because the statute of limitations has long expired. The detective then plays the tape of the 11th victim. He reveals that a radio broadcast in the background proves that the footage was shot on the day of the 14th presidential election ballot count, which is the exact date in 1992. Apparently, the killer still has 14 minutes until the statute of limitations truly expires. The killer willingly admits that he kept the 11th victim with him for 2 years. He then tells the detective the time he finally decided to kill her was when she claimed to have been carrying the killer's child in the hopes of being spared. The detective is enraged by that and attempts to shoot the killer, but is stopped by his colleague. Afterward, the killer makes an escape. After another lengthy chase, the detective finally catches up to the killer, but is stopped from killing him just in time. As he is being led away in handcuffs, the boxer and the leading woman both attempt to stab the killer, but to no avail. Eventually, the detective surprise stabs him with a poison pen. The movie ends 5 years later in the early winter of 2012. The detective is released from jail. As he walks out, he is greeted by the media and the grateful group of victims' family members. They thank him for all he has done avenging all the victims and preventing any of the family members from being convicted of any crime. They now heal a little bit from the wounds of the past, but will never forget the megalomaniac killer and his confession of murder. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.